Tonight, I have 6 alien, UFO, and abduction stories for you. Try not to get too creeped out and enjoy the stories.
I've seen bright lights in the sky for as long as I could remember. I remember being really little and looking out my window and seeing a light shining into my room. The next thing I remember was being in my bed as this, what I can only recall as a translucent being entering my room. It resembled that of a person that had a static electricity looking outline. Do you know those white body outlines you see in a crime scene where there was a homicide committed? Kind of like that, except instead of a white line, it looked just like electricity. I don't remember ever feeling fear. I do remember feeling paralysis, and the air was full and thick with static, just like how you would feel when a thunderstorm approaches. I remember this being approaching me while I was in bed and raising its arm. The very next thing I remember is being on some sort of table-like structure surrounded by these same beings. I couldn't really tell you where I was because, quite frankly, I don't know. Again, my memory is very fuzzy about the whole situation. I remember waking back up in my bed. I felt like a part of me was missing. Something wasn't right. I couldn't quite put my finger on it. This happened when I was only 7 years old. These same lights would appear on and off outside for years to come. I grew up in the same house I was brought home from the hospital. I moved out when I was 19 and haven't dealt with any of the same experiences with the lights since. However, since that one night, I felt that I've needed therapy because it's damaged me so much emotionally. I don't know if what was done to me was so traumatic that my brain had blocked it out. All I know is I still feel empty. I feel total despair. Something was taken from me that I can never get back. I wish I knew what it was. I know it might sound crazy to some, but I'm sure there's got to be someone else out there that's experienced something similar. Thank you for hearing me out. This story took place in 2009. I was only 21 at the time and had just begun a drinking binge with my other slightly underage friends. We were all having a great drunken night on Lake Okeechobee in Florida and having the time of our lives. I've gone to this lake before, so I was familiar with the area. My brother was with us, so he was the designated driver, and as you guessed, he wasn't indulging in drinks. We weren't planning on staying all night, no, just until it got late enough to where my brother couldn't stay up anymore. We were having a great time drinking and hanging out by the lake when I remember being so involved in conversation that I didn't even notice this bright blue light that appeared right above us. All of my friends dropped their beers in unison, what seemed, with their mouths open. Even my brother was freaking out. We all looked up and just saw this bright orb emitting this incredible bright blue light. It wasn't a defined orb per se, only glowing, just a glowing ball of light. It hovered about 50 feet above us, only momentarily, and then flew around the lake after that. It went in all sorts of directions until finally flying off in the night sky. It would radiate bright and dim down at all sorts of uneven intervals of time. The light, however, emitted from it was extremely bright still. We were scared, but at the same time, I thought we were all tripping balls until my sober brother mentioned that he had seen it too. I don't know if that was an alien, UFO, or what, but it was a weird experience. When I was younger, I want to say in 4th or 5th grade, one of my friends disappeared from school for a while. It's much more complicated than that. It was around the fall time, and the next thing I know, I'm not seeing him in school anymore. After a couple of weeks, I decided to go to his house, and I remember the police being there. His parents looked extremely distressed, and I honestly thought he died. Being a kid, I didn't pursue anything and just went off with life. Teachers and classmates wouldn't talk about it. I guess it turns out he just went missing. No one knew what happened to him. Life just went on. I never went and revisited his house after that. I remember spring and summer came back around, and it was almost time for summer break. I remember going to school and seeing him there and freaking out. Everybody was. We all had so many questions for him, but the teachers strongly discouraged us from asking anything, asking us and pleading us to be sensitive, and we tried to continue on class and school as much as usual. It wasn't until after school that I remember walking home with him, asking him what was going on, where he had been for the past school year. He got reticent and said he didn't want to talk about it. I let it go after that. It wasn't until years later in high school he finally opened up and told me just what happened to him. He prefaced and said to me that I wouldn't believe a word he said, but I convinced him I would. He went on to tell me how one night he remembers waking up in a strange white room. He said it had a weird glow to it. He said these peculiar looking men kept him in this room and observed him like an animal almost. He told me how scared he was, but that only a few hours had passed, he thought. He said merely there were several times in this room that these strange multicolored lights would scan over him. He didn't know what was going on. He said the next thing he remembered after this was him waking back up in his bed in the same clothes he disappeared in. It had been 7 months, and his parents were convinced he died or was kidnapped, trafficked, etc. He said police were now involved, and he had to recount his story. His parents weren't sure what to make of it, and the police were baffled. He doesn't honestly know where he was taken to, or who took him. And he's not a believer in paranormal or UFO stuff, so he doesn't even know how to explain it himself. We're long out of college now, and he lives a pretty normal life, but to this day, I'll always be convinced that he was taken by a UFO and held captive. Late one night when I was driving home from work, I experienced what I can only describe as a UFO. I've never had any previous encounters with the unknown, paranormal, or anything out of the ordinary. Where I live is about 30 miles off of a main highway out in the middle of nowhere. To get to my work, I have to drive about 45 minutes plus just to get to the main highway, and then a ways out a little bit further. I work at a small retail store, and so I was closing that night. I usually get off around 9:30, so it was around 10 when this happened. This occurred in March of last year. I was making my way back up to the long road to my house, and at one point or another, I remember looking outside my passenger side window and noticing this oddly shaped light in the sky. I just assumed it was a plane, but thought it was strange because where I live, there's never any planes or any of that around here. It was moving so slowly, almost like it was stationary. I thought that was strange, so as I'm driving, I kept looking over at it. It was looking like it was gliding slowly across the night sky. I tried to look and see if I could make out a shape or a silhouette of a plane, but could not. At one point or another, this thing immediately takes off at the speed I've never seen a plane ever fly. I remember thinking to myself, did I just see a UFO? There's no way. After letting this soak in a little, I came to the realization that it was indeed some sort of UFO. This event took place in 2005. It's bothered me ever since the day it happened. I worked at the time doing design for a small graphic design firm. This night, I was working late to finish a project I had to get done for the next day. I had a strict deadline for the project. I was good friends with the owner of the company, so he never really cared how late I worked till. I remember it was about midnight or so when I was leaving work, luckily with my design project in the bag and ready for the following day. It was pissing raining outside. I mean, just pouring down. About halfway home, the rain stops and I was able to see a little more clearly. As I'm pulling into my neighborhood, which, might I add, is very well lit with streetlights and such, I see this strange floating object in the air. I'd say about 200 plus feet up. It looked like this bizarre looking black cube structure. I have no other way to describe it. It was rather large and just floating perfectly still in one spot. It was hovering. It looked like it had weird designs etched into it, like it was made out of obsidian or something like that. It looked like stone, but was partially reflective. It looked like it was carved out of something natural. I actually stopped my car just so I could stick my head out of the driver's window to look at it. I'm staring up at it, thinking, what the fuck? Then it starts spinning rapidly, and then takes off super fast and vanishes. I couldn't believe my eyes. It never once made a sound or emitted any sort of light. Where I was in my neighborhood at the time, it was after midnight, and it was pretty close to dead silent. No other traffic, no dogs barking, nothing. This thing didn't even make a sound. I sat there in the middle of the road with my head still out the window, just trying to piece together what I had just seen. I can't stop thinking about what I'd seen. I wasn't sure who to tell. or even who to talk to. I haven't really told anyone about it personally, just due to not wanting to face ridicule or disbelief. I have a pretty good job and I don't want to risk anything going down the shitter. I've been looking into the black cube phenomenon before though, and could only find some things here and there. What do you all know about it? A few close friends of mine and I saw this weird orb-shaped object just a few miles south of San Diego, along the coastline. It was a shiny, black-looking orb. This was back in 2015. I've been looking into this, and I can't find a whole lot on what we saw. It was this large, what we can only describe as an orb. It wasn't emitting any light. It almost looked like it was made entirely of black marble. It was glossy looking, with weird patterns running all along it. I know this kind of thing isn't as common to see, but I don't know what else to say about what we all saw. It was just hovering out there above the water. It looked pretty large and like it was off the coast just a ways. It stayed stationary, so I'm sure others happened to see it too, since it was during the day.
Tonight, I'll be bringing you 4 terrifying Ouija board stories. Close your doors, lock your windows, and get ready.
This story happened in October of 2004, back when I was still a third-year high school student. My friends and I stuck around the school late at night after our annual Halloween party. We had agreed to try out my friend's Ouija board. It wasn't the brightest idea, but we needed a thrill. We found a nice spot under a huge gnarl tree and proceeded with our half-assed ritual. There were 5 of us, 2 boys and 3 girls. We were all expecting some kind of paranormal contact. Rumors had it our school itself was haunted, but we've never really experienced anything firsthand. And it was Halloween when all the spirits came out to play. We all wanted to get spooked. Also, we've never seen a Ouija board firsthand before, so we were pretty excited. Our school was an old Spanish colonial house, built in the 1800s when the Spaniards still occupied the Philippines. We were in a section of the school that doesn't get used often, located beside a creepy old Jesuit house. People only go there when they needed to use the restroom, store equipment on one of the sheds, or make out with their boyfriends or girlfriends. We sat down in the middle of an open space, with only an exposed bare bulb nearby, illuminating the surroundings. We were all having a laugh, scaring each other with what-if scenarios. It was your typical dumb kids doing dumb things. My friend who brought the Ouija board proceeded to place it in the middle of our circle. If I remember correctly, it was the glow-in-the-dark version, which we found hilarious. But it gave us the ability to see what was written in the dark. Not knowing what to do, and going after what we've seen in the movies, we all proceeded to place our index finger on top of the planchet. We sat there looking at each other until one of us said, "What's next?" We didn't know if there was a proper way to start the ritual. Plus, the board did not come with instructions, so we decided to just throw in a question. Is anyone there? I called out into the darkness. If there are spirits living here, please talk to us. One of the girls joined in. We clearly had no idea what we were doing. Still, nothing. Not even the slightest bit of wind. One of my friends jerked the planchette, and the girl who bought the Ouija board screamed, breaking the silence. We all laughed at how ridiculous it was. After a bit of joking around, we decided to give it another go. We all placed our index finger on top of the planchette once more and asked, if there's anyone there, we would like to make contact. Don't break the circle, one of my friends jokingly said. Shut up, I whispered. We were just about ready to give up when the wind started to pick up. The stillness broke, and the darkness around us seemed to move and come alive. Just a coincidence, we thought. Okay, don't break the circle, I yelled out. Is anyone there? I was excited. It was like a scene from a movie, with dirt and dead leaves swirling around us. Guys, I'm scared, my friend sitting beside me said. My mom warned me about playing with forces we don't know. Did you die here? Were you killed during the war? Are you the headless priest that roams these halls? Did you know our national hero? Are you a hottie? My friend giggled. At this point, we were all throwing random, stupid questions. Nothing. This is bullshit. I don't want to do this anymore, my friend said, exasperated. We were all thinking the same thing. Just then, a group of dogs from the neighboring house started barking at us through the chain link fence. These 6 dogs were growling and showing their teeth. We all screamed and without finishing the ritual, bolted out of there. We didn't see each other until after Halloween break, and this is where it gets creepy. One of the girls told us about a weird experience she had that night after playing with the board. She got home late, after hanging out with her friends from the neighborhood, when she realized that she forgot the keys to her house. So, she called her brother up, who was then still sharing a room with her, and what he said crept the hell out of her. He swore she was already home. He claimed to have seen her walk in a while ago, and that she looked really tired and saw her head straight to bed. Creepy, but no need to freak ourselves out, was all we thought. Besides, her brother must have just been tired and possibly seeing things. But then my other friend started telling us about an encounter she had that same Halloween night. She was going up to her room when the lights started flickering as she was ascending the staircase. Your typical Hollywood horror movie visuals. Shrug it off to faulty wiring. But just then, she saw the door to her room open, and a dark figure stepped out and stood atop of their staircase. She couldn't make out the entity's face, but she recounted that she couldn't move and felt utter dread as the figure stared down at her. "No way!" my best friend, who just joined in on the conversation, said in disbelief. Something happened to me as well. He recalled that he was sleeping one night when he woke up, feeling really uncomfortable. He described his vision as having TV-like static, and a feeling of heaviness surrounded him. He looked around the room, and that's when he saw a bloody, charred face with piercing red eyes grinning at him through the window. I couldn't believe what I was hearing, because I had an almost run-in with death that same night. After the ritual, I was sleeping in our sedan on the way home after fooling around with the Ouija board, when I felt our car jerk. I woke up instantly. Looking out the window, I found out that we've been hit by a huge oil tanker. I panicked and leapt out of the car. Luckily, my mom and I survived the crash since the front of the car was a total wreck. I still don't have an explanation to why those things happened to us, but thank God nothing happened after that. I never played or gotten near a Ouija board ever since. A couple of years ago, I went to a rehab in Southern California for alcohol and Xanax addictions. My family and friends were beginning to worry about me a lot, so if anything, I did it more for them than for me. Being there for almost 4 months, we all got pretty close. However, disaster struck and my roommate decided to hit the needle again. Needless to say, that was the last time he ever would, as he overdosed in his apartment, collapsed in his closet with a needle still in his arm. This is where some friends and I found him, motionless. We called 911 immediately, but it was unfortunately too late. A few weeks pass, and we are still living in the same apartment that he passed away in. Being newly sober and not really knowing what sober people do with their lives all day, we do a bunch of random shit to keep our minds off of our older habits. This night, we decided to use a Ouija board. We all sat in the living room and began. We said the prayer, put our hands on the planchet, and started asking routine questions, and of course, got nothing. About to quit, someone had the brilliant idea of going into our friend's room that passed away. Sitting in that room, we pulled everything out again, redid the procedure, and asked for, let's call him Brad. We asked, Brad, are you still with us? Amazingly, the planchette went to yes. Both a little freaked out and a little excited, we continued. We asked simple things like if he was okay, etc. All was okay until we asked Brad why he did it. The planchette went to B, A, D, G, N, E. We thought about this for a while and asked, Brad gone? Planchette rapidly went to yes. Who is this? We asked. Nothing. Angry, I screamed. Who the fuck is this? Planchette moving like I've never seen it move before. Z, O, Z, O, Z, O. Over and over again. I had no clue what the fuck this was, but I turned to my friend and his face was white. When the planchette finally came to a rest, I asked my friend what was wrong. He stammered we needed to quit. We need to stop this now. Being a huge tough guy, it was strange to me that he was so scared. Stop being a pussy, I said jokingly. That Zozo, a Ouija board demon, he pretends to be a friend or family member and finally reveals himself. I took this in and kind of chuckled to myself. Oh, really? That friend took off and went back to his apartment, while 2 of us stayed, taunting the demon and cussing him out. We finally asked what he wanted, and the planchette shot straight at me. Terrified, I asked, What do you want with me? It took off in the direction of H, E, L, L, respectively. I stated, You want me in hell? It shot to yes. Are you going to kill me? The planchette stayed at yes. Getting a little freaked out now, I asked, How are you going to kill me? F, I, R, and the planchette shot towards one of our candles, knocking it onto the floor, starting a small fire on the carpet. We quickly put it out. As we were doing so, looked at the last letter on the planchette, and it landed on E. Fire. Looking at this, we said goodbye on the Ouija board and burned that board the same night. I refused to sleep in that apartment again after that night and broke my sobriety soon after, going back to my home. So Zozo, I hope we do not meet again. Okay, so first, I'll start this off with this is true, and yes, I don't care if it was used. I would love it. Anyway, I'll start by saying I'm a very paranoid person, and the fact that I am alone home all day since I do online classes definitely can't help. So I started online school this year, and I'm not going to lie, it's pretty boring, but I don't mind at all, really. But as a small child, I have always been afraid of my house. I think it was built in the 1950s, so rather new but rather broken down. Our basement, well, the whole basement, is the size of our house, and that's where it all starts. I've always had the fear of our basement, and it wasn't just the instinct fear everyone has either. I just knew it was much more than that. Our basement has no door, just a long, echoing stairwell that you walk down. My mom sleeps down there in her room, and the laundry room, etc. It's also down there, so it's not like I'm a complete fucking baby about it. When I walk up the stairs, I see shadows darting across, and I sometimes, when laying in my mom's bed, will hear footsteps coming from the nearby rooms. I know, that's all just a nightmare for a horror fanatic, but an extremely paranoid person as myself. Just starting this school year, and my hall light outside my room was beginning to go out. Even though we have checked its fuse and changed the bulbs, nothing is wrong with it. None of this had been happening since April 2nd, the day after my birthday, when a friend and I played the Ouija board. I did everything properly, and did and said all the right things. Mind you, I had been researching to do it right for the past 2 years, but it worked, and not many problems came too close after that, except for August 2016, when it all went further downhill. Our garage door that leads to our yard is in our kitchen, and I tend to hear it open a lot, and it really fucks me up. But lately, after hearing it opening so many times, I have been locking it during the day and before I go to bed. Also, nobody, not even me or my family, has a key to it. This door is extremely loud and creaky, so you know when it's open. I have 2 Great Danes, and we usually sit in my living room while I work, and you can't see the kitchen or anything from the angle of the room. And I began keeping a taser with me at all times. I love it. But before that, I started locking the back door. I would hear it pop open, and then I would proceed to hear footsteps through the house, frozen in fear, not knowing what to do at that point. I locked my door and just sat there. I know, stupid. But I always, when the footsteps stop, hear the door close and my yard door open and close, as if somebody was leaving. One specific time, it was around noon or so, and I remember thinking my dad was home because what I had been hearing, I yelled, "Hi, Dad!" as my dogs went absolute fucking apeshit barking, and I heard running and the door slam as if somebody had realized I was here and ran out. A few weeks ago, it was a Friday, and my dad had, unknown to my knowledge, came home for lunch about 1 o'clock and came in shouting at me that he had just caught a man running out of the backyard when he pulled up. I remember when he said that I froze dead fucking about and shit myself and just shut down. There had been somebody in my house all 3 of those times, so a man in my house, don't come back. When I was 8 years old, my family moved into the house I grew up in. It wasn't an old house, and no one had died in it, and it didn't even feel creepy. Just an average suburban house in your average southern suburbs. The way the house was set up, when you came in the front door, there was a hallway with 2 bedrooms and a bathroom to the right. The large living room in front of you with a hallway separating it from the dining room to the left, and the kitchen on the other side of the dining room. Where the kitchen and the living room met, there was another small hallway, and the master bedroom. A bedroom that was used as an office, and a bathroom, and then a breakfast nook leading to a laundry and utility area at the end of the kitchen. My room was to the right of the front door, and down the hallway past the bathroom, with the other bedroom on this hallway, used for storage mostly, as I was my mother's only child, and my half-brother and sister didn't live with us, and rarely came to visit. The first time anything really happened in the house, I was about 9, and had lost my last tooth. Still being a kid, of course the tooth fairy was expected, so when I woke up in the middle of the night and saw a figure standing in the middle of my room, I assumed it was the tooth fairy. It was bald, and only about 3 or 4 feet tall, about the size of an average child, standing completely still in the middle of my room. I remember my parents telling me that if I was awake, the tooth fairy wouldn't leave me any money, so I rolled over and went back to sleep. When I got up the next morning, I excitedly told my parents that I'd seen the tooth fairy the night before. I described what I'd seen, but they told me it was just a dream. For the next several years after that, I continued seeing and hearing minor things in the house. When I was home alone, cabinet doors would open and close. I'd hear dishes being moved around in the kitchen, or catch movement out of the corner of my eye. The most common was often at night. I'd wake up to see a young woman hovering over my bed. She was dressed like the Rosie and the Riveter character from the old posters from the 1940s, with the red and white bandana around her hair and a denim shirt. When I would see her, she'd stare at me for a few moments, and then slowly float over my body and out through the wall behind me. I was never afraid of her though. When I was about 12, my parents divorced, and it was just me and my mother living in the house. By the time I was in my later teens, my mom was rarely home, and my house became the hangout for me and my friends. Most nights, everyone gathering together to play Dungeons and Dragons, or something similar after work. One night, we were hanging out, but didn't want to play. So, I pulled out a Ouija board. I'd picked it up at the local toy store just a few weeks prior, wanting to try it out. We sat in my room to play with the lights out and the door closed, and it went pretty normally. Nothing crazy happening for the most part. The only strange thing that happened was at one point, we asked something like, "Show yourself," and at that point, we heard the front door open and close, and heavy footsteps come down the hall towards my room. The handle of my door started to turn, and one of the guys jumped up and locked the door before it could open. We didn't hear anything else. No footsteps moving away from the door or anything. And after a little while, we turned on the light and opened the door to see if my mother had come home unexpectedly. The house was empty, and the front door was locked. We decided we'd had enough of the game at that point, put it up, and everybody went home. A few weeks later, we were hanging out at my house again, this time playing Dungeons and Dragons, though one of the girls that usually came had to work late and had classes in the morning, so She'd said that she wouldn't be coming. While we were sitting in the living room playing, at around 2 in the morning, suddenly we heard footsteps run across my wooden porch. It sounded like someone very short or a small child running quickly. Everyone in the room heard it, and we had a conversation as to if our friend had changed her mind and had just arrived, as she was very short, and it made more sense than a child running through the neighborhood at that time of the night. When she never came into the house, we all got up to look, and there was nobody outside, and her car was not in the yard. Her boyfriend, who was with us, gave her a call and verified that it was not her, as she had just arrived home on the other side of town and was currently getting ready for bed. Around this time, the activity in the house greatly picked up. I saw shadow figures with red eyes often in the living and dining room of the house, footsteps and other noises at all hours of the day or night. I started waking up in my room to see hooded figures standing near my window and door. It was around this time my half-brother, who I was close to, passed away. It was sudden, and I hadn't seen him in years, as he had gotten heavily into drugs, and my mother had decided to keep him away from me because she didn't want him to be a bad influence. After that, I'd wake up hearing his voice saying my name in the middle of the night quite often. On a whim one night, I sat down and typed out a letter to him on my computer that was in my bedroom, since I was home alone that night and bored. Now, this computer was hooked up to an old dot matrix printer, one of the really loud kind that makes all kinds of racket when it's running. After I wrote the letter, I felt silly for it and deleted it without saving it or printing it, and shut down the computer before I went to bed. Around 3 in the morning, I woke up and my bed was soaking wet. At first, I thought my puppy had peed on the bed because he was too small to get down, even though he was housebroken and I'd taken him out just before bed. I got up to let him outside and change my bed sheets when I realized the wet was just water, and it was more than a tiny puppy could have ever made. On my way to take my blankets to the laundry room, I passed the bathroom in my hallway and noticed the light was on, even though I turned off all the lights before bed. There, sitting on the counter, was a pitcher from the kitchen, with the inside still wet. When I was really young, my brother used to wake my sister and I up by throwing water on us because it made me laugh. When I got back into my room and started making my bed, I noticed a piece of paper lying on top of my printer. It was the letter that I'd written to him and never saved nor printed. The computer was still shut down, and the printer was off, but it had been printed out, torn off the printer and laid on top of it, as if someone had to read it. The normal things like this continued for a few years when I lived there on and off, before turning dark shortly before I moved out of the house for good. The hooded figures appeared more often. I woke up one night with a feeling that I was being stared at, only to roll over and see what looked like a rotting corpse a few inches away from my face. And one night, I woke up to a hooded man standing at the foot of my bed, with my bedroom door open when it had been closed before. He held up his hand, and a ball of blue light appeared in his palm, which he threw at my face. He and the ball disappeared just before it hit me, but the room was so cold that I could see my breath on a normally hot southern summer night. When I was in my early 20s, after I moved out for good, I had one last experience in the house. My mother hadn't been to the house in months and was preparing to sell it. I had told one of my cousins about the things that had happened there throughout the years, and he decided that one night out of boredom he and a friend of his would pick me up to go ghost hunting in the house while it was empty. We each had a camera, and he had a voice recorder that he had brought. We set the recorder in my old bedroom and spent an hour or two wandering around the house taking pictures. When we got done, we came back to my room and sat to listen to the recording and discuss all of the nothing that we had found. On the recording, we could hear our voices moving from room to room and talking about how my cousin's friend's camera had a sexy shutter sound, and the fact that my camera stopped working almost as soon as we walked in the door. About 20 minutes into the recording, when we could hear all three of our voices echoing from the other side of the house, a deep voice that sounded like it was right up against the microphone on the recording spoke.
"Get the fuck out."
We immediately obliged. I found out a few years later that my mom actually had several experiences in that house with waking up to find an older man in his 50s or 60s looking through her closet, or seeing him just wandering around the house. When she'd say anything or get his attention, he'd turn around and just look at her, and then vanish. She always thought he was just something else, like an apparition, or maybe she was dreaming. But with everything I saw over the years at that house, I can't help but think it was something else.
Maybe it was the Ouija board.